So Holly, what's coming up on the doorsteps?
So, needless to say, housing comes up on the doors a lot. We're meeting a lot of adults who are stuck living in their childhood bedrooms. We're meeting their parents who have their adult children living in their homes. We're meeting parents who are trying to pay for accommodation for their teenager adult children in university. The list goes on. Housing is a huge issue on the doors. Disability services is something that consistently comes up, and in my term as a TD, something that we're contacted about the most, be it access to assessment of need, to children's disability network teams, special education classes, special education schools. We don't have one in Cork Southwest. Respite services, access to transport, employment, the list goes on and on and on. Cost of living is coming up in so many different ways, be it the cost of childcare, people literally not being able to access childcare. So they're probably the main issues that are coming up.
And what do you think you can do differently under the Social Democrats can get a part of power?
We want to be very clear about the different approach that we would take. So what we've seen from this most recent government is, record budget surpluses. Those surpluses represent an opportunity to transform our housing market, to invest in affordable purchase homes, to invest in disability services, in healthcare services, and instead they've squandered that opportunity. They're splashing the cash around almost indiscriminately, blatantly, to try and buy this election, to try and buy your vote. And now the election's been called, they're throwing around promises like they were cash. Things like Fine Gael talking about the new VAT rate. They could have introduced that in their very recent budget and they didn't. And what they've actually suggested is bringing up the VAT on everybody's energy bills up to 11% as well. So not even thinking these things through. We would take a very different approach. We wouldn't promise massive tax cuts and investment in public services. We wouldn't engage in auction politics to try to buy your vote. We would invest in what we think matters, in housing, health, disability, climate and childcare.
Do you think in Cork Southwest that you have to take decisions and make decisions that can be divisive? Like within agriculture, it's a controversial and divisive issue. Is it something you feel you have to take a position on?
I think it's really important to take a position in politics, and what we've often seen, or always maybe in Ireland seen, is a style of politics where politicians almost try to plumose the electorate. They kind of say, oh, tell people what they want to hear, and it's almost accepted that then that might not be what happens when you go into government or how you vote and all of these things. And I think there's an underestimation of the electorate there, that they'd rather politicians who are a bit more straight talking with them. And I think it's really important to be straight talking with farmers as well. And, political narrative around agriculture for a long time now has been that any kind of climate action will negatively impact our agriculture sector. The opposite is true. The agriculture sector would be the first and the most damaged by climate change. So climate action is very much future-proofing the sector. We know there's a huge problem with generational renewal. We need to ensure that we have a really prosperous future for this sector, because not only is it a really important part of our economy in terms of our exports, it's a really important part of our culture. We've always been really proud of our agriculture sector, and rightly so, and we should continue to be. Ireland should be held up as the example of the most sustainable type of agriculture in Europe, in the world, in my opinion, because we have the climate for it, we have the soil for it, we have all of these things going for it. What we don't have is the ambition to do more for the sector, to become the future of it, and to make more young people want to get into the sector ultimately.
You've taken a different line, we'll say, with like a lot of other politicians have been pushing the derogations and saying it needs to be. You've taken a different line in that, and do you think sort of that that's something that, like, again, if the Social Democrats do take part of power, that you will be kind of emphasising?
Yeah, and the issue with derogation is you completely understand why a farmer who has a derogation wants to keep it. What we've seen from previous governments is this kind of intensification of the sector, and department policy has directly incentivised that. And when the rug is pulled from people and suddenly you have to reduce the number in your herd, that's a reduction in income that you need, that might be already spent, all of these things. So it's really understandable that people feel protective and want to keep the derogation. The reality is the derogation was just reduced. We are now the only country who have this exemption, and ultimately European laws will eventually prohibit us from having it. It's my view that denying that reality literally walks farmers to a cliff edge. We've just seen one of those cliff edges where the derogation was reduced, and I think farmers would be much better served by a government that would plan for that would find other ways, make sure the transition is fair, not continuously walk farmers to a cliff edge and claim that blindly defending something that isn't going to last is somehow fighting for farmers. I just don't see how that makes sense. And ultimately, you know, there's so much we could be doing for our agriculture sector, and this constant focus on that one thing instead of, you know, what is the future of the sector? How do we get more generational renewal into the sector, and all of these other things, I think is an example of the short-sightedness that we've had from government after government in terms of agriculture.
Tell me, why are you voting for Holly?
Because I think she's amazing at her work, and she's passionate about what she stands for, and I feel like she's genuine, and I really like what she does and watch her approaches and what she's standing for. Yeah.
Are there any issues that are coming up in Cork South West that are different from the rest of the country or particular for this area?
I suppose our issues in fishing are kind of like there are other constituencies like Donegal who are similarly affected, but I suppose it's not something that, you know, constituencies in the Midlands are dealing with in the same way perhaps. And, you know, obviously we're a very agricultural community here as well, but ultimately I think sometimes people can feel like you know, urban areas and rural areas are two different worlds. The same issues are affecting people in Cork South West as they are in Cork City. It's housing, it's access to healthcare, it's disability services, childcare, all of these things. Sometimes these issues are just felt more acutely in a rural area. So yeah, the things we're hearing on the doors are similar to the issues you'd hear around the country. Access to affordable housing, to be able to rent somewhere affordable, not being able to, you know, being left on a waiting list. We have more than 1 million people, or just under 1 million people on waiting lists in Ireland at the moment for healthcare services. So there's things unique to the area and things that people are experiencing all over the country as well.
Is it difficult to be mixing being the party leader as well as actually looking after home affairs basically in Cork South West and looking after your own seat?
Say during an election campaign, from a kind of logistical perspective, it can feel like a juggling act, having the role of leadership and in Cork South West, but ultimately no. I got into politics because I wanted better for my community here in Cork South West. The opportunity to be the leader of the party makes me able to bring those issues to the Taoiseach, makes me able to bring the issues facing us here in Cork South West into programme for government talks. So ultimately the two positions are the same thing. It's still fighting for the same thing. I want the social democratic policies to be introduced for my community in Cork South West. Our candidates all over the country want the same for their communities, and that's ultimately why we're all doing this. So it's maybe it feels like it's a bigger job, there's more responsibility, but fighting for the same thing ultimately with a stronger platform to do that, which I'm really, really grateful for.
And the reaction on the doorsteps has been good?
So far so good, and it's actually kind of emotional going around to the doors now, because when I first decided to go for election in Cork South West, people laughed at me and they told me that I didn't have a hope of getting elected, and ultimately the people of Cork South West gave me a chance. I'm so grateful for that, and ever since then I've put my absolute heart and soul into it. I've worked so hard, and you know, you really hope then that you've done enough and that people want you to keep going and give you another chance, and the positive reception on the doors has been really kind of heartwarming in that sense. But of course we don't know what the result will be until polling day. This is a really competitive constituency, but yeah, I'm asking people in Cork South West to give me a chance again, And this does feel like the election for the Social Democrats where we can turn our policies into a reality. And I'd really, really like the opportunity to do that.
And on a personal level, you're expecting your first child. Has there been a positive reception on the doorsteps to that also?
Yeah, just loads of people wishing us well. Obviously, it's such an exciting time. People who've, gone through the same journey, obviously giving me lots of advice and tips, which is really nice and welcome. So yeah, really nice response.
Okay, best of luck.
Thank you.